Thanks, Jenny.
Fabulous.
Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Jenny Williams, and thank you for the lovely introduction, Elaine. Just to reiterate, get up, move around, get a cup of tea, answer Amazon, do whatever you need to. I would love to have some chat in the chat function, questions, thoughts, challenges, provocations, all of that delicious stuff. At some point, I would love to be able to draw you into the conversation. If you prefer not to, that's okay too. If you have conversations, please put them in the chat. And Georgia, thank you if you can just alert me and we can stop and pause. I am a producer. I worked in the arts and heritage sector for over 25 years, and my passion and purpose has been on inclusion, diversity, encouraging folks who have low opportunities to engage in arts and culture to break down barriers to those opportunities. And I have a focus particularly, especially since 2020, on race inclusion. And today we're going to be talking about equality, diversity, and inclusion, which is one of my favourite subjects. I hope it's going to be yours by the end of this too. I have Georgia has been kind enough to put the PowerPoint that accompanies this in the chat. Could you kindly give me a thumbs down or whatever, maybe a thumbs up if you have got it in front of you, because what I'd rather do is talk to you than share my screen. If you haven't got it, thank you, Sam has got it. And if I can ask Georgia to kindly just make sure, if anybody hasn't got it, then I can put it on the screen. Okay?
I have just resent it again now to the meeting chat, just in case it got lost.
That's great. And it is your resource, so you don't have to take notes. I'd just rather you digested the information. It is very wordy, and that's why I put thank you, Robin, thank you, Kaylee. That's why I've put it as a resource as we go, because there's some things that you're going to need to revisit, and there's some things you're going to go, what is this? A lot of this is legal stuff. So it's just really about us trying to make this a conversation. I'm not going to go around and do who are you, your name and your work, because I feel like we should just get on with the conversation. Is that okay, Elaine? Thank you. So the ground rules for the conversation are, please do put things in chat. If you feel that there's anything triggering in the conversation, then please come to me and talk about it. Come to me afterwards if you need to. I always encourage folks to think about what they're feeling when we have conversations about diversity and inclusion, anti-racism, prejudice, harassment. You know, think about what you're feeling. Think about what your body's doing. And we often feel stuff first and then put a name to it. So I'm just going to ask you to notice what you're feeling. And that for me is my cue in my work to say, actually, I'm noticing that my body's reacting to this and I don't know why. I can't name it. So therefore, it often means I need to go and do some more research. I often need some downtime. I need time to consider. I need to go and talk to somebody. So please do that within your practice today. Okie dokie. Any thoughts, questions? I love questions. I love interruptions. I love chats. So please feel free. But let's get cracking. Now, my slides are slightly different from yours, so I'm just going to say what the title is, and please do try and follow. So the first one is the session objectives. And what we're going to try and do today is we're going to split it into two. I'm going to have about 15 minutes of talking and then ask you if you've got any thoughts, comments on what we're talking about. And then the first bit is about understanding the concepts of equality, diversity, and inclusion. Because knowledge is power, right? So hopefully you'll come away thinking, right, I get what it is. We're going to talk about the different types of discrimination in law, which I think is fascinating. And then we're going to think about how they manifest and what we need to look out for in the workplace. And then we're going to talk about the legal framing of this work, which is really important in our work in the cultural sector, and we'll unpick why. The second part of the conversation is going to do a little bit of history and looking at the EDI journey in the cultural sector over the last 40 years, 40 plus years actually, and a little bit of signposting to more information because it is such a rich dialogue. And then we're going to look a bit about what's happening now and the new guidance out with Let's Create and this pillar around inclusivity and relevance. We're going to sort of contextualize it in how it's sort of formulated and got to the point we are, and what it means to your practice, your processes, your thinking around what you're doing in Bedford. Hopefully we're going to get through it. So let's dive in. Any questions, thoughts, comments? I'm going to check on chat. I think we're all right. We're ready to go. So you've got a lovely image on your PowerPoint, which is called What is EDI? And then you've got all these different folk in front of all these different animals in front of a tree. And the guy is saying, for a fair selection, everyone has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. So that's the intro into what we're trying to talk about what EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion, actually means, okay? I will use that acronym EDI. So first slide, E, what is equality? And we're going to be very factual about what these things are, okay? Because knowledge is power. Equality in EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion across the board is the state of being equal. So we're talking about being equal in opportunity, access, resource, for individuals, for groups of people who come to your venue, who come to your program, who come to work in your workplace, that everybody has an equal start. You'll often find that organisations, sometimes smaller organisations, have an equal opportunities policy, and it sets out what that equality looks like. And it's usually recruitment, it's usually how people are promoted, it's usually development opportunities. So Arts Council will have one, most NPOs will have one, and it will cover grievance procedures if there's a disciplinary process, or if there's an accusation of harassment, and so on and so forth. And that will be the guiding document of what is the state of being equal within that process. So we move on to the D, EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion. What is the D? The D is diversity, and it's focused on differences. And what's interesting is the differences are vast. So we all come to the workplace, we all come to this conversation we're having today with so many differences across race, across ability, across our marital or partnership status, our geography, our socioeconomic background, our thinking, our perspective, our ability, and so on and so on and so on. And often we talk about people's multi-difference through this lens of intersectionality, which you might have also heard about. Diversity is about recognising the visible and invisible differences. And the difference is, we're not saying we're tolerating difference. In EDI practice, we are not tolerating people being different. Think about that word tolerate and what that implies. It doesn't imply implicit welcome. It doesn't imply that people are celebrated. It does not imply a sense of empowerment and belonging. So what we're looking for in EDI is that actually diversity is about celebrating people's differences. And we often get that wrong about, well, is it about, having a party? It's not. It's about actually saying we recognize people are different and we want to create a framework, a relationship, a relationship where we celebrate and empower folks with differences that come to our table. The thing that we've got to remember is that some differences are protected in law, but not all. And so when we look at this list that I've got here, so academic, professional background, socioeconomic, that is not currently protected in law. So EDI is a philosophy, it's a thinking, it's a way of being, and it's a way of us delivering our programs of work. When we come to what's legally enshrined, we'll be able to start seeing the difference. Any questions? We okay? Good. Right, we move on to EDI. So what is inclusion? So inclusivity is about the way that we create safe, welcoming and equitable environments where everyone is valued. And that's actually a quote from the Arts Council's website. So inclusivity is about creating safe, welcoming and equitable environments. So we're asking people to feel that they can participate and be themselves. I often used to talk about turning up in the workplace in my early career and saying to my colleagues that as a person of colour in a very white environment, I had to leave part of my personality at the door, and then I would pick up my personality and go back home. But actually what we're saying is, with inclusive practice, that your full self is able to participate in that place. And it's kind of like, I often equate it with fairness. I just want to tarry on this as well, to think about, and what I'm going to challenge you to think about is what it is to create an inclusive environment where people can be their full self, where fairness can exist. And for us as creators of spaces, of creators of places where people come together, what does that mean for us? And what does that mean for our inclusive leadership? What values do we need to bring to the work? And what kind of environment do we want to create? If we want to create an inclusive environment, then what are we required to do as makers of that space? That inclusive arts program needs to look like ... What does it need to do? How do folks feel that they can come to your spaces and places and feel included? If you want to, put some notes on chat because I'd be very interested to hear. We will be talking about it later, but I'm challenging you to start thinking about what inclusive leadership looks like for you. I'm going to share this screen because it's pretty important. And this slide here, we can see it. This is also in your pack. And we've talked about equality, as in equality, diversity, inclusion. But I just want to also add this thing about equity, because it often gets misinterpreted what equity is and the difference there is between equality and equity. You remember when we spoke about equality, we said it's about people having access to the same resources and opportunities. So you can see in the picture very clearly that even though there's folks of different heights, the box that they're standing on is the same resource. And it doesn't take account that some people aren't quite at having the same access to opportunity. What equity does, it recognizes the different circumstances that people come to us with, and it allocates the resources according to what people need. So when we talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion, we also need to think about, well, are we still reaching everybody, or are there implicit barriers to access that we need to take account of? Equitable practice is often misinterpreted around the work called affirmative action or positive action. Don't know if folks have heard of that. So positive action is, or known in the States as affirmative action, is where you say, I had an example, a course I was doing last week, where somebody said, in this university, they recognized that they didn't have people of colour coming to the university to study XYZ course. So they said, we're going to do a programme of positive action to work in said schools and to offer programmes that directly talk to those folks who aren't represented within their courses. That's a programme of positive action. Some folks will say that's not fair because under equality law, that's not offering everybody the same access to opportunity. But under equitable practice, we're saying that some folks who are underrepresented require different resources and opportunities. And that's what we're looking at as well in equitable practice. You'll often see programs of work in the arts sector that respond to this by saying, collecting stats and saying, look, we can see that there are 4% of people from disabled communities who are applying for grants. So we know that there is something going on, that there are barriers to access. So we need to do some kind of positive action program around that, or some kind of equitable practice to attract that certain group. We can relate that to our own practice by looking at stats. And that's kind of what I wanted to start drawing out, is the reason and the way we can see where we need to focus our attention is by using stats and evidence-led approaches. I'm going to stop sharing screen and look at chat. Any messages, any thoughts? Thank you, Elaine. Positive discrimination is illegal for everybody other than our disabled communities. So you'll often find in recruitment, they'll say, if you fulfill every criteria on our job description, you automatically get an interview. So that is the only stance where positive discrimination is legal, and everything else is illegal. There is no such thing as positive discrimination in any other realm. So you're absolutely right in that respect. And positive action is legal, and it is enshrined in the law. It's complicated, and there's lots and lots of ways of doing it, and you obviously need a lawyer for a lot of it. But yeah, thank you for that question. Your next slide looks at justice. And I think justice is really interesting. You'll often hear people saying, let's be more Jedi, which I love. Justice, equality, diversity, inclusion. And I wanted to touch on that because I think that there's a lot of relevance around justice work and the way we're looking at arts practice. And this is my provocation to you, it's my thinking. So justice is very much about dismantling barriers to resources and opportunities so that people can have a full and dignified life. So we're looking at dismantling barriers for the isms in life and the ears in life, the transphobias, the racisms, the classisms, the sexism, and really looking at what those barriers are and starting to take them out, starting to say, let's design them out of our systems and practices. What I think is really interesting in the work that we're doing, and this is my provocation to you, and the work that you're doing, is what does that mean for our practice in the cultural sector? Because we talk a lot about the democratization of arts. We talk about socially engaged practice. We talk about participation. We talk about shared decision-making. And these are all really, really interesting new practices. So when we put that in our quality, diversity, inclusion practice, should we be including justice in that? And that's my question. I'm going to move us on to the legal framework, again in your handout. And the legal framework is really, really important because you're thinking, why do I need to know this? I'm not a lawyer. But the legal framework is really important for us all to be aware of, because our funders, our local authority partners, Arts Council England, DCMS, they all need to follow this legal framework, every NPO as well. So the legal framework is, let's have a look. The slide that says Equality Act 2010, the 9 protected characteristics. So this is our main equality duty. This is our main law and legal framework around equality, diversity and inclusion. It was amended in 2010, and before that there was 116 pieces of legislation that were dotted around. In race equality, the most significant piece of Race Equality Act was in 1976, and then it got amended again in 2001. And then in disability law, I think you were looking at the 1920s when the first disability laws became enshrined in the legal system, and then kept getting changed. And the key focus is that the Equality Act has changed many times over the course of the last 100 years. So it will keep evolving, I should imagine, and so it should. So the Equality Act 2010 is our latest iteration of EDI, Equality Framework in Law. We're naming 9 characteristics, which is a new way of talking about people with different identities that are protected in the law. And that's the key to remember. And the key 9 protected characteristics are age, disability, gender reassignment, sexual orientation, pregnancy and maternity, race, marriage and civil partnership, religion or belief, and sex. ACE has to follow these guidelines under the public sector duty, which complements this law. Why I'm telling you this is because anybody that is publicly funded, i.e. through the taxpayer, is legally obliged to follow the public sector duty, which says that you have to enhance community cohesion, you have to follow the codes of the Equality Act, and you have to collect data. So when we're thinking about Arts Council, the relationship we have with our funder is that they need to know that the Equality Act is being upheld as a public funder, and that they can actually collect the stats. And that's why we'll have all of these evaluation forms, all of these, forms that we have to tick, and this and this and this and this. I absolutely love stats. I think stats are really, really important. Us understanding who's participating, who's not, where the opportunities are and where they're not, and how we can readdress some of those imbalances. So I've highlighted the ones that Arts Council has to respond to under the legal framework. So you'll see it's age, disability, sexual orientation, race and sex. The others are not reported against, and I couldn't tell you the legal data as to why, but it's just so. So you'll see in their reports that we're going to have a look at later is that these are the headings that they will report against, and you'll see that in your evaluation forms. Further is that ACE have also said that they're going to report against socio-economic background, i.e. class. So that is an addition that they've chosen to make. So as well as those ones that I've listed, the 5 on the screen, there is also a reporting back that Arts Council has chosen to do around class, socio-economic, we will call it. I'm going to pause in case there's any questions. That's quite a lot of information. Oh, I'm glad you like that, Amy. I think that's pretty groovy too. Okay, next slide. Thank you for going along. This is a lot of information. So the next slide that I wanted to take you to is the Human Rights Act, because we're hearing a lot about the Human Rights Act. I thought, let's just contextualize where it sits. And the Human Rights Act came into force in the year 2000. So if you think about the linear, that actually 2010 was when the Equality Act came out, but before that, in 2000, that was when we had the Human Rights Act. Now, what does it do? Actually, it means that as a citizen, we are allowed to defend our rights in UK courts, and ensures that public organisations have to respect and protect your rights. These are the key, I think there's 14 in total, and I've just put the key ones on this list, which are everything from the right to life to the right to education. The one that I'm interested in is the right to freedom of expression. So that's the legal framework around and about equality, diversity, and inclusion. So we know that it's manifested in the law. We know that it's enshrined in the law. We know that it's about specific protected characteristics. And we also know that equality, diversity, and inclusion strategies allow us to go further than the law, as Arts Council has, if you so choose it. So what does that mean in terms of the work we do and how we ensure that DEI, JEDI, EDI, whatever we choose to call it, is absolutely enshrined in our work and our practices and our sector. So let's think about, and I always say this to folks, let's think about how the manifestations of inequality, so now we're hearing the difference, inequality, where things aren't equal, inequity, where we might have to redress a balance, injustice, which is about protected characteristics, Human Rights Act, and intolerance. Yeah, so we've got lots of different ways of nuancing when we talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion. Lots of different ways where we're thinking about, well, how does the manifestation of those values that don't comply with EDI show up? What does the discrimination look like? What does the inequality look like? The inequity, the injustice, the intolerance. And those are the things that I spend my days thinking of. The legal framework is very clear about what discrimination looks like. And you've got a slide on there, and I could talk to you about those things, but actually, if you wanted to, you can hop onto Google and discover that there is such a thing as associative discrimination, where if you have, which came about as a result of a mother with a disabled child who had to take her child to the hospital many times and was dismissed by her employer because of that and termed as lazy, and she took her employer to court, and a new law was enshrined called associative discrimination, discrimination by association. So there's lots and lots of different forms of discrimination. Where we have to be careful is if you run an organization or if you run a program where you are legally in charge, and that discrimination happens and there's a court case that follows or there's a charge of discrimination. And what we need to do is figure out how we ensure that all of our programs have really, really safe and strong policies and procedures around them. That's what I say to everybody who runs an organization. I'm sure Elaine has loads of policies around inclusion. And for us as freelancers and for folk who are, I put on events here, there and everywhere, but I have my own code of conduct that I have when I write a contract, for example, and I try and make sure that the way that the events are put together ensure that people are able to have access and are able to join my events free from discrimination. And again, here's my provocation to you. As producers, as makers of places and spaces, how do we ensure that we create spaces that are accessible, inclusive, and free from discrimination for everybody? How do we do that? Do we need a policy? Do we need a procedure? Do we need to write it into our contracts, as I do? Do we need to have a process if there is an issue that comes up, for example? Elaine, I'm going to ask you to show the video in a minute. The last slide I have on the legal definition is the social model of disability, which I hope most folks have heard of. The social model of disability is really important, and it's a way of reframing our perception that a person's impairment or difference is actually framed through the lens of being caused by society. And so we're reframing that the barriers are framed by a social construct in society. And because it's a social construct, we as makers of places and spaces need to find ways to remove those barriers. So I'm going to show you a really fantastic 2.5-minute video by Shape Arts, which explains it beautifully. I think you're on mute, Elaine.
According to the medical model of disability, the word disabled means less able. Less able to achieve your potential, less able to have meaningful relationships, less able to play an active part in the world around you, and that this is just your bad luck. This outdated view of the world puts the responsibility of overcoming disabling barriers on the person with an impairment. But this idea is changing. The more modern social model of disability says that a person doesn't have a disability, that they are disabled. They are disabled by society. It is the attitudes and physical barriers imposed on them by society that prevents them from achieving their potential. The social model was developed by disabled people and their allies to help them take action against discrimination and to empower people to find solutions, remove barriers, and campaign together for equality and human rights. They showed how people with lots of different impairments face many of the same problems. These disabling barriers include prejudiced opinions and attitudes, restricted access, and people being systematically excluded. The social model looks for the ways that society can be planned and organised in order to provide accessibility, independence, and opportunity in a way that enables people rather than disables them. What we learn from the social model of disability is that disability is a social construct created by social barriers, barriers which can be eliminated. We learn that it is the responsibility of government, public spaces, businesses, and individual people to make the changes, to increase the access, and build a more equal society, where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Perfect. Thank you so much for
Imagine
sharing.
a town for physically impaired people.
And that was, thank you. And that was actually a video from Shape Arts, who I can't recommend enough for their archive material and also the resources on their website. What I would also like to add is that the Arts Council have absolutely embedded the social model of disability into their practice. And this is the lens they see the work, especially if we're doing that with our disabled members of our communities. That is, thank you, that is actually the model with which, the lens with which we approach the work. Any questions, thoughts? Okay. I'm going to move us on to the section 2 of our conversation, which is looking at the cultural sector and the journey over the last 40+ years, and a bit of signposting if you want to find out some more information, and to think about what that means in terms of the new guidance of materials around inclusivity and relevance. Thank you. I appreciate the thinking in the chat. Please carry on. That's really, really helpful. So I would like us to think about the reason that I wanted us to start with an understanding of what all of this work means, EDI and justice. I really want us to start thinking about what does that mean in our sector and what does that mean in our practice, because otherwise it doesn't go anywhere. So we've got a bit of knowledge and we can re-look at it and we can revisit it and re-question things. But now, what does it mean to the work that we do? And how is this a conversation that is continuing the work that has been done for the last 40 plus years? I would like to set us a quick exercise and I'm going to ask you to put it into chat, okay? So I would like you in the next minute, okay, we're only going to do 3 minutes on this exercise, to think about the value of EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion in society. What is the value of equality, diversity and inclusion to society? Big picture. A minute. Thank you, Amy. Keep them coming. Got about 20 seconds. Okie dokie. Thank you. Thank you, Oscar. The next question I have is, what is the value of equality, diversity and inclusion to the cultural sector? So we thought society, now cultural sector. 1 minute. Why is it important? Is it important? Do we care? Does it make a difference? Nice. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Amy. What else for culture? Anything else? Yes, indeed. Thank you, Talia. And my last one, thank you. Great. Getting some good ones in now. My last one, and we're going to put it all together, is what is the value of equality, diversity and inclusion to your practice? What difference does it make? Yes, to your practice. Yes. Any other thoughts? That's lovely. While you carry on writing, I'm just going to share my screen and we're going to have a look at some of those. That's the question I posed to you. And I love this question because it shows how multi-dimensional this work is. Now, can I see the chat whilst I'm doing this? Let's have a look. Yes. And so what did we get? We got, thank you to everybody who put into chat. I know it's difficult when we're doing it like this, so it's appreciated. But some of the responses around society, thank you. The benefits are you have access to everyone's thoughts, opinions, and create a system that works for everyone. Yes, and yes, and yes. We have awareness of the variety of people we live in our society, the differences, the diversity, and we understand everyone's needs and have opportunities for all. Love it. People try things which they might not have known about otherwise. Love it. Society. And then we talked about cultural sector. Some of the responses have been, we would have a lot more art and creative passion. There would be no elitism. Yes. The barriers to creative sector should be removed. Yes, and yes again. People get to see art, theatre, performings, and experiences of a wider range of people. And I think we do that really well in the cultural sector. If we didn't learn about each other's cultures, we'd live in a bubble, agreed, which breeds those isms. Yes. Culture is always changing and developing, and we can actively ensure values of EDI are included going forward, learning about other people's experiences, engendering empathetic towards other people. And then about our practice, forgive me, and then about cultural sector, we make the world exciting. Indeed, includes everyone, love, the love ethic. I love that, bell hooks. Yes. As creatives, we are makers of happiness and joy. Our work is more creative, more beautiful, richer and joyful. I mean, yes, this is the society I want to live in. And then when we think about the value of EDI for our practice, thank you. Got some lovely, lovely responses here. Thank you. It's about benefiting from what society at large tends to ignore, giving voice, story and voice, how important, creating the spaces for everyone to thrive instead of those most privileged. It's everything that your company is about, telling stories from marginalized voices. Our practice becomes a tool for social change, amplifies voices. Perfect. Thank you so much. I don't know if there's more, Georgia, that I didn't see, but I'm going to collate them. And on the screen, you will see that usually the responses happen in these stratas, that they happen across. The value of EDI is usually around values and moral. It's the right thing we want to do. It's the society we want to live in. It aligns with our mission statement and our EDI work. The economic case, which maybe we could add, which actually it makes great sense to broaden and widen audiences. The legal case, which we talked about, we legally are required to by our funders and the Equality Act 2010. And this one, which you touched on in the last one about your practice and your organisation, that actually it's about the cultural and creative. It makes our work richer and enables us to tell wider stories. So we have these kind of like interconnected cases, the moral case, economic case, legal case, and the creative case. Which leads me on nicely to your next slide, which is the creative case for diversity. And many years ago, the Arts Council decided that they were going to absolutely talk more about the creative case for diversity, and we still are talking about that. In your slide, you'll see what that means, which is about what we've just said. It's about reflecting the diversity of society and communities. It's recognizing the value of difference and diversity. It's enriching our arts and cultural offer, i.e. our stories and our story and voice, the communities we work with, as well as ensuring all artists have access to opportunities and resources, remember that, to create excellent work that reflects the presence, stories, and voices of all our communities. So it's really worthwhile going online and seeing, if you would like to, the Creative Case for Diversity, which is online from Arts Council, and there's more information on that. A little about the history of equality, diversity, and inclusion in the cultural sector. As I alluded to, this work has been going on for an awful long time, and there was a report written in 1971 called The Arts Britain Ignores by the late great Naseem Khan. She was the first head of diversity at Arts Council England. I was the fourth. And in 1971, she wrote about Black and ethnically diverse peoples who were not being represented and recognised in the arts funding system. In the late 70s, the National Disability Arts Movement really took form. And we saw the emergence of organisations that are still here today, like SHAPE, and some of the most extraordinary practitioners. And we will see in the notes that I've given you is that SHAPE have an archive, which is called the National Disability Arts Archive. It's ndaca.org, and it's just so rich with artists, movements, work that has been done for the last 40 plus years. And recently there has been, in 2020, the emergence of a new organisation and new movement, which is called the Working Class Creatives Movement. And I mentioned the longevity of this work because there's often a myth, I think, that the cultural sector has been inclusive and is inclusive. It's work, and people have done the work to get us to where we are, and the work needs to continue, and that continues individually. It continues with the work that we produce, who we work with, how we do it in our organisations, in how we collect data, how we represent people, how we look at equity, how we look at equality, how we view inclusion, and how we view difference. And so this work in EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion, isn't something that sits there. It actually is in our hands, it's in our gift. And seeing the work that's been done by the Disability Arts Movement, the work that my colleagues and I've done in the past, is really important, and we all have a role to play in that. I'm really also very interested in the work of the Working Class Creative Movement, which started only in 2020. So I'm going to move us on to think about the Arts Council's definition of diversity, which I've touched on. When you look at it, and again, I'm going to share my screen, and you'll see that the Arts Council's definition of diversity encompasses the first 9 are the protected characteristics. That's the legal duty. We saw them, didn't we? So those are the 9 characteristics. And then these are the additions: class and economic disadvantage, social and institutional barriers that prevent people from participating in and enjoying the arts. And this is where, when you're putting in your bids, you will need to respond. When you're thinking about investment from Arts Council, they're talking now about the inclusivity and relevance investment principle linked to Let's Create. Okay, and that's how they're going to collect data, evidence on their work in EDI through the funding that we are delivering. So the inclusivity and relevance principle is based on 3 pillars: communities, workforce leadership and government, and the creative case for diversity. What does that mean to you? What do you think they're looking for from you? And I would say that actually start thinking about the projects you're developing just for some time through the lens of what we've spoken about, EDI. So what might that look like? How do you identify what barriers some groups of communities that you work with have? How do you identify and then take targeted action? It could be that your work is socially engaged. It could be that you decide to have shared decision making. It could be that you choose to view your work through the lens of conscious inclusion. Do you remember we talked about what inclusive leadership means? For me, it means about being really conscious about inclusivity. It's definitely about identifying barriers to participation for your communities and taking targeted action. So we're looking at evidence-based approaches. Maybe it's looking at co-creation. Maybe it's looking at working with the unusual suspects. So what does EDI mean to your practice, and how will that respond to the investment principle? I've collected some data because I love data, and data is our friend in this work. And there is lots and lots of data around Bedford, if you are working in Bedford, which I think is really, really, really interesting. And again, I encourage you to ask questions as to where does EDI sit within this knowledge. So we know that there's going to be a huge amount of housing over the next 20 years in Bedford. What does that mean to you in your practice through the inclusion lens? We know that Bedford has a higher than average of a historic multi-diverse population. It's actually really, really interesting. The white British population in Bedford is 64%, and the national average in England is 73%. That's nearly 10% difference. So that's a really, really interesting statistic that I think is fascinating. And there's lots and lots of information that you can find on Bedford Community Insight, on the Audience Agency local data, on census. I picked up that the figures, the last thing on the screen there, from the Trusselltuck Trust showed that there was double the amount of food parcels handed out in a 1-year period, went from 13,000 to 21,000, which again says a lot about socioeconomic and class and so forth, so on and so forth. So I'm really encouraging you to think about data, to really drive your decision making, to really drive how you build evidence-led approaches into your work around inclusion and diversity. So with that in mind, we have a minute left. I'm just going to leave that for open questions and any thoughts on your own practice. On the last page of your slide, I've got some questions for you, which is taken from the inclusivity and relevance data and advice at Arts Council. It's really, really interesting. A whole suite of materials that I do encourage you to read. And it asks you questions around who had a role in telling your stories and who had a part to play in bringing your programme to life. All those things we were talking about, story and voice. So social and institutional category would be those folks that they identify are not engaging or who have, do you remember we were talking about underrepresentation? So it would fall into the evidence-led approaches. Does that help, Amy? And with that, it is 1 o'clock, thank you. I'm just going to hang around here in case there's any questions. That's been an awful lot of information, but hopefully we have achieved what we set out to do, which was that you would have a greater understanding of what on earth does EDI mean anyway? What's the cultural sector journey in EDI work? What's the current standing on EDI and Let's Create for Arts Council, and what does it mean to my practice? So thank you so much for having me. The hour went really quickly.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm just going to keep the recording going just for another minute or two, just in case any questions that are quite important that might pop up. But I'll let everyone know once it's finished.
Yeah, I just want to say that was really, really useful. I really particularly liked, I'll show you my face. I really particularly liked the stuff about equity that I hadn't considered about. I mean, as a woman, you would think I probably would, you know, and I was pregnant in the workplace and all of that, so that falls into it. And so I get it, but I hadn't considered it for my own practice. So that was really good. And I also really loved the video and reframing the way, because disabled is such a rubbish word, and looking at it from society's point of view and what they put on is such a it's a bit of an eye-opener actually. And it triggered me a little bit to make me realize, whilst I look up diversity maybe from lots of other areas, because I'm less familiar with I don't have any disabled people in my life, I don't like that word. So it's actually woken me up a little bit and go, actually, this is a black area for me. This is somewhere that I've not considered. So
Right.
that was really useful.
Thank you. And I really recommend that archive that I was talking about from Shape, which is extraordinary.
Yeah, I've written it down. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. That's really helpful. And that's why you've got these notes, because there was a lot of information.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's excuse me, if there's no more questions, I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll make sure that you receive the recording if you're in the session, and just to double check that everyone had the PowerPoint and the YouTube video too. Oh, I just think we've got one more comment quickly just before I end the recording.
Thank you everybody. And yes, Claire, I think it's actually how it's used in the social model that we were talking about.
Thank you all. I'm just going to stop the recording now. Thank you so much.